Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, happy Groundhog Day! I am crossing my fingers for an early spring, but we will see what Punxsutawney Phil has to say. To honor my favorite rodent in the Commonwealth, we're bringing back a segment from last January. I sat down with host Megan Harris and interim executive producer Mary Lee Williams and shared the silliest facts I could find about Phil and his groundhog wife, Phyllis. It's Sunday, February 2nd. I'm Sophia Lowe, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about.
Sophia, I am very excited because you have been teasing us with this story for days.
Yes, you're welcome in advance, everyone. I'm very excited about this. We are 1 week away from February 2nd, which is Groundhog Day.
I didn't know that you were this into the Groundhog Day. This has just been great to behold.
I am less into the Groundhog Day and more into Phil lore, to be specific. I really love fuzzy little creatures like groundhogs, and I also keep my eyes out for groundhogs when I'm wandering around the Allegheny Cemetery. I spotted a few in the fall.
I'm sure they don't disappoint you. Yeah. Remind us, what is Groundhog Day?
Yes, well, Punxsutawney Phil, a groundhog, will let us know whether spring is coming soon or we can expect more dreary winter days. At this point, I'm usually ready for spring, but we got what I really feel like is our first real snow, so I wouldn't be too upset with more winter.
I want more winter.
I know that Punxsutawney is a place, and this place is actually not that far from Pittsburgh. It's like an hour and a half away, and to be honest, if you can't tell by the way I started that sentence, before I moved here, I thought Punxsutawney was made up. I legit did not think it was a real place. So I'm happy that you are invested in this Pennsylvania tradition.
What can I say? I love fuzzy little creatures, and I am still a fan of silly traditions, even if I am more groundhog forward. But PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, is not a fan of Groundhog Day. They actually wrote to the Punxsutawney Groundhog Club. That's the group that runs Groundhog Day. They have the Inner Circle, bunch of other fancy titles, and they take care of the groundhog year-round. And PETA suggested switching out Phil for a giant coin toss.
Giant?
What?
Like a giant coin. Like the coin
flipping
would be
a
big.
coin instead of seeing about the shadow?
Yes.
I mean, the odds are probably the same.
I forget which it is. What if he sees the shadow, there's a thing, and if he doesn't see his shadow, it's a thing. Which one is it?
Okay. So if Phil sees his shadow, that means that winter's going to go on for 6 more weeks. And if Phil doesn't see his shadow, spring will arrive early, which I think is weird. Like, he'll see a shadow if it's sunny, and doesn't that mean warm weather? But what do I know? I'm not a meteorologist or a groundhog,
neither
I guess.
is Phil.
I don't know.
I mean, the coin will probably be just as accurate as Phil. I'm just going to throw that one out there. But I also need...
I actually just Googled that, Mary Lee. Apparently, the accuracy rate, depending on the outlet you're looking at for Phil, is approximately 40%. So the coin is better.
But the coin's not fuzzy.
Sophia, we can make that coin fuzzy.
Ooh, that sounds scary. No, thank you.
Yeah, back to this, what'd you say? Would you call it a fan club of some kind?
The Inner Circle, Megan.
That's it, the Inner Circle.
Oh, that's just a fancy word for all of the people that kind of run the Groundhog Day tradition, plan other events during the year, and take care of Phil on the celebration, February 2nd. You'll see them all in top hats and stuff.
Oh, I thought this was a cult.
I didn't think it was a cult, but I didn't know what they were called.
But again, let's even get more into the meat. So what, can you dig in a little bit more to swapping him out for a coin? A groundhog and a coin are obviously not the same thing, as you have pointed out, not fuzzy.
Fuzzy versus non-fuzzy, the only difference to me. But PETA's release, PETA has pointed out that, like we've touched on, Phil isn't an accurate weather predictor, and a coin flip would have better odds, but they're also concerned about the general treatment of Phil. In this year's release, they said he, quote, deserves better than to be exploited every year for tourism money, end quote. So he's kept in an enclosure in the library, so Phil obviously doesn't get to live in the wild like a usual groundhog and do groundhog activities like burrow around. PETA's also pointed out that groundhogs are shy animals, and Phil, well, he's definitely getting a lot of attention on this day and being around crowds and all of that. And another part of this complaint is that it's winter. It's typically the time that groundhogs would be hibernating, but Phil is out and about giving this fake weather update. And this isn't the first time that PETA's advocated for getting Phil out of this situation and into a sanctuary. They've suggested a few other traditions for Groundhog Day instead.
Like what kind of traditions?
So last year they offered to send a philanthropist to live in Phil's library enclosure for a year and also make a weather prediction.
Like a human would live in the enclosure?
Yes, and they could make the prediction while wearing a groundhog costume.
That seems somehow worse.
Excellent.
Yes, exactly. My thought too. And in 2020, they wrote about using an animatronic groundhog to predict the weather using AI. So I guess that would actually be more accurate. But like, I don't know.
I'll give them points for creativity.
Look, PETA is nothing but a creative organization, I would argue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little confused about why they do this every year. I guess, big day, but I feel like there are much more important animal cruelty issues to address instead of one groundhog.
It also seems like this one gets treated pretty well by and large.
Yeah.
Like he gets a lot of attention. I know cameras maybe aren't like the nicest thing, but he seems like the rest of the year he lives a pretty good life.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time on the website, and he gets a nice diet of like fruits and veggies. He did get a cavity once because he ate too many treats, so he saw like a dentist. Like, he might get his teeth checked out more often than I do. Who knows?
Earlier you mentioned lore. So like what kind of groundhog lore did you dig up?
Yes, Phil Facts, my name for it. So there's 2 FAQs on the Groundhog Club's website. One is like questions about how to see like his shadow prediction in person. That's all fine. The fun one is the Phil lore. First and foremost, my favorite fact is that the club asserts that Phil has always been correct in his weather predictions. So this is how the whole process works. He gives his prediction to the club's president in groundhogese. And the website says that the club president is the only person who can understand the language. So to me, this implies that if the prediction is wrong, it's the president's fault for having a faulty grasp of the language.
Yeah, it's always human error. Sure, got it.
The president hasn't fully immersed himself in groundhogese, so clearly that's where the issue is. But like,
needs a new class.
No class, just magic, I guess. Because, CityCast has done an episode about Groundhog Day, and I brought back a clip from that from when we talked to Phil's handler, who explained more about how the president learns groundhogese.
It's not natural to anyone except for the president, and they're able to interpret it through their possession of, how they think it goes down. But really, I pull him out of his stump. I set him on the stump. Phil and Phil alone decides whether or not he's seen his shadow, and then he communicates that, his findings to the president of the Groundhog Club. He's the only person in the world that can interpret groundhogese.
How long did it take to learn that language, or is it natural in Punxsutawney?
It's not natural to anyone except for the president, and they're able to interpret it through their possession of this ancient acacia wood cane. It's a wooden walking cane that's been passed down from president to president, and through the possession of that cane, that's what gives you those abilities. But it's kind of like the sword and the stone. Like you or I might pick that cane up, and you might look at Phil and he starts twitching his nose, and if you recognize what he's saying, then you would probably be the next in line to be the president of the Groundhog Club. I pick up that cane and it's just like another walking cane. So that's kind of how that works.
So the cane does it?
You gotta believe in the magic, Mary Lee.
The magic of the cane.
The magic of the cane. I really feel like since they wear those silly hats, it should be the hat.
Well, they all wear silly hats, so
Yes, but-
then it wouldn't just be the president who knows Groundhog is, and I guess that makes it less special. I don't know.
I mean, maybe if more people knew Groundhog Ease, we wouldn't have a prediction problem.
That's true. That's true.
One other thing that I want everyone to know is Phil is canonically the same Phil since Groundhog Day first started. Apparently, he has a little sip of an elixir that gives him longer life. His wife, her name is Phyllis, does not get this elixir. I have follow-up questions to that. Does that mean that Phyllis has been replaced over the years? Does Phil know about it? Does he mourn his former wives? Who knows?
I feel like the more you tell me about these lore things, the more I'm kind of getting on PETA's side now.
I mean, anecdotally, though, I feel like I've heard that groundhogs are like, as critters, like kind of fragile. Like, do y'all remember that story of de Blasio dropping the one in New York and it died right after that? And, like, they just don't live that long. There was an NPR story I remember from when, what was his name? Milltown Mel died. He was the New Jersey groundhog.
Oh, God.
But he was like, yeah, they just don't live like past 3 or 4 years in the wild and 8 to 12 in captivity. I'm pulling up this NPR story now. The Jersey people insist that they had 2 that lived past 20 years. But either way, that means that Phil has needed to be replaced a few times, once in a while.
Do those numbers make you less on PETA's side, Mary Lee? I don't know. I feel like if they live that long in captivity, that means something's going right.
I mean, like, I don't know. It's mostly just that you said that he has to mourn multiple wives. That just made me feel really bad.
Sorry I made this dark. I can end with a high note?
Yes, you get one
please.
more Phil fact, and everyone needs to know that fact is spelled with a PH.
That's true. We're looking at Sophia's notes in real time. It's amazing.
But then you're cut off.
Last one, like I said, happier one, quick one. Phil apparently likes to spend his days reading the newspaper, so I hope someone subscribed him to Hey Pittsburgh or plays him this podcast. That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. In case you're wondering what PETA proposed as Phil's replacement this year, it's a vegan weather reveal cake. It's a play off a gender reveal. We talked about this on Friday's show, so go check it out if you haven't yet. But TLDR, if the cake is blue, that would mean 6 more weeks of winter, and a pink cake would mean an early spring. This, to me, does not have the same mystique as Phil, but regardless, I wonder what PETA will come up with next year. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you then.
We will shout the next time that we hear about him in our area.
Or maybe we'll say something in Groundhogese.
We can't understand it. We don't have the cane.
I'll
No
get
cane.
the cane. I'll get that cane.